to our next speaker. So I'm happy to introduce Dr. Christy Manning. She is a visiting assistant professor of environmental studies and the associate director of the Educating Sustainability Ambassadors Program at McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota. So her research and teaching explore the cognitive, social, and situational factors that influences people's behavior and lifestyle choices, and how these choices positively or negatively impact ecological systems. So she's particularly interested in people's cognitive and emotional response to information about climate change. So she's co-authored a book, Psychology for Sustainability, and I love this, in her non-work life, she's an avid biker for recreation and commuting. She is also an enthusiastic but haphazard vegetable gardener. So, welcome, Christy.
Thank you. I am very sorry that I'm not there joining you in person, but there is a lot of snow on the ground between here and there. So we're going to make this work via WebEx or Zoom. I'm not sure exactly what program we're using here. So yes, I am a visiting professor of environmental studies at McAllister College in St. Paul. I am also a psychologist by training, a cognitive and biological psychologist. What I want to talk with you about today is my sound okay?
Yeah.
What I want to talk with you about today is research that I have been doing with colleagues, also here in St. Paul, for the last 12 years that link psychology and a range of different psychological subfields with people's motivation to engage in resource-preserving behavior or environmentally relevant behavior, sustainable behavior. So I usually start a talk like this with the rhetorical question, why psychology? It is delightful to me that this question is becoming less and less of a necessary start. Most people now kind of see the link between sustainable behavior or environmental problems and individual human motivations and understandings. But I will run through this anyway, just in case there are any skeptics out there in the audience. So why did the conference organizers invite a psychologist to speak with you today? I offer you this image, and unfortunately I'm speaking to a blank screen, or not blank screen, my own screen, and so I don't really know, I can't get any response from you out there. I don't know if any of you have ever encountered this image before, or if any of you have an idea of what this image depicts. I will just tell you, this is an image created by a digital graphic artist named Chris Jordan. His materials are available on the internet. He has a site, and he depicts American mass consumption in his artwork. So this is one of his images, and I want you to just think and look at it and see if you can figure out what this image might depict, American mass consumption. It's a composite image. If you zoom in a little bit, you may start to be able to see what was in this image. And if I zoom in one more time, you can see that it's an image of plastic bags. So we'll go back to the composite. This is an image of 60,000 plastic bags, 60,000. And that number of plastic bags is the number that is used in the United States, taken from a store like Walgreens or the grocery store every 5 seconds, according to Chris Jordan's research. So every 5 seconds in the United States, this many plastic bags are being taken from the shelf and put into our environment in some way. This is the website for Chris Jordan. I probably don't need to share with all of you that this is a pretty bad thing environmentally. There are lots of problems with plastic bags. They are made of a non-renewable resource and a resource that is intensive to extract, and its extraction process has a lot of negative impacts, human and environmental. In addition, plastic bags, less than 1% of those 60,000 plastic bags we consume every 5 seconds actually end up in a recycling facility, even though plastic bags can theoretically be recycled. Fewer than 1% are actually recycled. Many end up in incinerators, and when they are burned, they release dioxin. When they decompose in a landfill, they release methane. And it takes between 10 and 1,000 years for a plastic bag to degrade in a landfill. In addition, plastic bags are made to be light and not to degrade very easily. So very often they blow out of our garbage cans and they end up on our landscape in our waterways. And there they are not only unsightly, but they have a range of negative impacts when they end up unintentionally, usually on the landscape and in our waterways. So I will go back to the number of 60,000 plastic bags every 5 seconds, linked with all of these problems. And I think that the psychology comes in when you realize that there is a widely available alternative to a large percentage. Not all plastic bags can be replaced, but a large percentage of the plastic bags we use can be replaced with a more environmentally benign alternative, reusable bags. So the psychology is why? Why are we not embracing this alternative? And what can we do? How can we learn about people's motivations to connect people with this preferable behavior rather than the environmentally degrading behavior? So that is what psychology can offer. And no longer do people look at me funny and think, oh, you mean you're an environmental psychologist, you provide therapy for people who are in grief about environmental degradation? That is not what I do. What I do is I look at lots of research and conduct my own research to try to understand what it is that fosters engagement and facilitates action. And that is what I want to offer you today. I am going to first present 2 very large, broad overview barriers. They come out of psychological research, but they're also sort of widely known. And then I'm going to dig a little deeper into psychology and talk with you about 4 different guidelines that come directly out of my own and my colleagues' research. All right. I should also mention that I have a handbook available online that I created it was around 2010 for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And much of this information is in that. It's a little old, so I've updated a lot of this since then. But I would certainly be happy to provide the link to this information if you find it helpful and want to know more. All right, so I'll start with the 2 main barriers to engaging in sustainable or water conserving, resource conserving behavior. All right, barrier number 1, it's us. It is human beings. It is the person, him or herself. So we know, and for a long time our understanding of this was anecdotal. Ever more research does indeed show that we are not operating on just with one brain, but in fact our brain has multiple processes working all at the same time. And If you are familiar with Nobel economist Daniel Kahneman, he wrote a book a few years ago called Thinking Fast and Slow. Many others have commented on this same idea, but he's probably the best known, that you can think of our brain as divided into two major streams of processing. And this is a very simplified version of what's really going on, but it's useful nonetheless. And young people in the room may not recognize these two characters, but for people around my age, within 10 or 20 years around my age, Mr. Spock and Captain Kirk are well known, and their personality quirks as well. And they map on kind of nicely to our two processes in the human brain. So Mr. Spock is very careful and analytical and not emotional, whereas Captain Kirk does not think, he just acts, he's passionate, he's emotional, and those line up pretty nicely with our more recently evolved cognitive rational brain and our older, evolutionarily older, what many people call the reptile brain, or the automatic brain. And these two systems are what guide us through life. The deliberate system, Mr. Spock, is what we use when we are thinking hard, whereas the automatic system is going in the background all the time. And the more we have on our plates, the more we try to multitask, the more we're distracted by technology, the less Mr. Spock we have available to really think hard about things. It's also true that Mr. Spock, it's hard work. In fact, thinking takes a huge number of calories. And so it's more cognitively expensive to think hard, and our brains are kind of hardwired to try to avoid that. It's evolutionarily more adaptive to try not to think too hard unless we absolutely have to. The other thing about the automatic and deliberative systems, they typically work together pretty well. And in fact, we have evolved these systems to work together as they do because they have served us well in our human evolutionary history. But in today's world, what happens is the kinds of problems we encounter are not, and this is called the evolutionary mismatch hypothesis, where earlier the problems that we encountered were clear and obvious dangers. The bear that jumps out at the woods. If we relied on Mr. Spock to figure out what to do, by the time he analyzed all the circumstances and all the data, the bear would have gotten us. So it's great to have the Captain Kirk part of our brain to get us out of situations without having to think about them. The problem is, in today's world, we encounter dangers that are not clear and obvious and that require some of that deliberative thinking to understand what is going on. And so we have this, again, this evolutionary mismatch between the way our brains have evolved to deal with risk and the kinds of risks that we face today. So that is the first basic barrier to action on water conservation and other resource and sustainability issues. The second barrier is the situation. So yes, indeed, we humans can think and we can get ourselves out of difficulties. We can solve problems using our effortful cognitive part of our brain. However, it's really important to note that we very often, when we want people to behave a certain way, we are not structuring a situation that actually allows them to act on what they want to do, or we prevent them from coming to the right answer because we make the situation, or the situation is structured to be so confusing. I'll use the example of something that I know in the Minnesota Department of Health has been thinking about a lot lately, and that is contaminants of emerging concern, such as pharmaceuticals showing up in natural bodies of water coming through sewer systems, things like people disposing improperly of medications, and also things like birth control that are actually coming through urine and entering waterways. So there's a push to tell people to dispose properly of medications. The issue is, and the situation that is created is people want to do the right thing. They want to dispose of their medications properly. They don't want to pour them down the drain if they know that it's a bad thing. But the people who are struggling with this, are very often in a situation that where they don't have a lot of extra cognitive capacity anyway, because they're burdened by health concerns, or they're burdened by the utter confusion of the numbers of medications that they have to deal with. And C, we really don't have a good infrastructure of alternatives for them through which they can dispose of the medications. So we have created a situation where people are, in large numbers, but not everybody, understand that they're not supposed to dispose of medications in the water, but they are not sure what else they're supposed to do, or the options are not locally available to them or are very expensive. So we really need to think not only about trying to convince people to act differently, but we have to create the kind of situations that make it easy for them to act differently. All right. So I hope I haven't lost anybody yet. All I see is an empty room there, the two doorways where the computer camera is pointed at. So hello up there. So that second point, people don't necessarily believe that psychology has a lot of equations in it, but if you walk away from anything, remembering anything from this talk, this might be the most important thing that you leave thinking about. And that is that every behavior that you would like people to carry out is going to happen in a situational context. And so you should never think about putting information out there or education out there without also thinking about how you can create a new situation that better enables people to act on the new information or new motivation that you have provided them with. So behavior change always needs to be tackled in two routes. You can increase internal motivation. That could be through the Captain Kirk emotional channel, or it could be through the Mr. Spock rational channel, or, and you should always do both, change the situational circumstances that better facilitate the kind of action you want to see. All right. So, those were the two main barriers, and now I'm going to run through 4 different guidelines from psychology. And as I mentioned before, these are described in the handbook that I created for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency a few years ago. Needs to be updated, but it is out there. All right. So, guideline from psychology number 1 is know your audience. And I have already pointed out that you are not probably talking to or communicating with people who have a lot of cognitive attention to give your message. So you don't want to throw a lot of facts at people. You want to always balance the information with personally relevant images, with things that are likely to catch their attention in a non-rational way. And I think a lot of people do this automatically, or people understand that this is very important. And I want to emphasize again that all of the psychological data indeed confirm that it's very important not to just give people data. I see everybody now, hello. It's important not to just give people data, but to give them something, some connection to those data. The other thing to think about is environmental problems are inherently impersonal. the environment we think of as being out there. So if you're going to talk about a water issue, you want to talk about it in terms of things that people hold more closely. So it's not about our water resources, it's about the water we drink, or the water that waters our agricultural system, the water that we swim in the summer, etc. It's the water that we depend upon for our lives, our livelihoods, and our recreation. The next piece about knowing your audience is to understand your audience's identity. So who is your audience? Who do they think, how do they think of themselves? Do they have a particular social identity? And can you match this behavior, link whatever behavior it is that you would like to encourage people to do with that particular identity? So Iowa farmers, for example, may want to, or may have as part of their identity a long tradition of land stewardship or of something else. And so can you connect the resource conserving behavior with that identity? So if you understand how people think of themselves, then it can an entree into getting their attention and helping them feel motivated to engage in the behaviors, to think about how that behavior connects to something that they hold important about themselves. Next it is really important, particularly in urban, in communities where people have historically been marginalized, to think about the history of what has happened in resource conversations before you arrived on the scene and before you wanted to communicate with people about the particular issue that is your issue of interest. The Flint water crisis illustrates this not nicely. It's not a nice situation, but it is really difficult to get people's attention and regain their trust after people have experienced being shut out of conversations, having been disenfranchised, lost the right to have any say at all over the resources at play, and then to have somebody else come in and tell them one more time that you can or cannot do this. So it's really important to think about what happened before you got on the scene, and have people had the power to act in the way, in a resource conserving way in the past, or have other people taken that right away from you. This is particularly important because you want to establish trust and credibility. You're there to do something that you believe is good for the community at large, and yet many communities have not felt served well, particularly by environmentalists who often have the reputation of caring more about the natural environment than about human communities. Colleagues and I actually did some research a few years ago at the University of St. Thomas, where we asked a group of students to write down the first words that came to mind when we said environmentalist, and we were really shocked, in fact, when we saw the results, because they described this guy on the screen. The words they used were extremist, hippie, barefoot, tree hugger, smelly. And so if you come in as somebody who is interested in pushing an environmental agenda, you will automatically lose the trust and the credibility of your community. So it's important to think about who in your community people do trust, and can you create partnerships with people who are trusted, or with organizations who are trusted and who are credible, and who have some social capital in those communities. And I'm going to talk about social capital now, because the second guideline from psychology is all about social norms. Now, I'm sure we have all had the experience. I have had the experience. I had this experience last night when I walked into my class of 23 students, where you walk into a room and it goes silent, and people look down, or they give you a glare, and you immediately start to feel like your palms are sweating and your heart is beating a little faster. You're getting a certain social signal. It's a social signal that you've done something that people don't approve of, and this comes out of our human evolutionary history. Yet again, back to human evolutionary history. We, through our development as tribal species, we have developed a very sensitive radar to social signals, because early humans who did not pay attention to what the people around them, their tribes mates, what they thought of them mattered very much. If I transgressed one of the behaviors that my tribe thought was important, I would be in grave danger of being kicked out of the tribe and facing most likely certain death. So we have developed this really sensitive social radar, and we're always on the lookout for signals from other people. And these are often signals that we're not consciously aware of. It's not the Mr. Spock part of us that is sensing these signals, it's the Captain Kirk part. So that's why this glare, even though you may not know consciously, but you start to feel it physiologically, this discomfort. And the problem is, what we're getting signals for in today's world, what is considered normal, acceptable behavior, really does not always align with resource conserving, sustainable behavior. So let me give you an example that my students love. Oh, wrong one. This one. So this, I think, is it's a normal behavior for some of my McAllister students. They give it the thumbs up when they see other people doing this, but in the world at large, this is not considered a normal behavior. And I like to point out that throwing away perfectly good food is actually the behavior that should be considered not normal. Yet our society frowns upon this behavior and considers this not normal. And so things are a little wacky, I think. Similarly, we accept a certain amount of trash in our waterways. We walk by it, we don't pick it up. We see it, and we're so used to it that it has become normative. So we are all tacitly accepting a certain level of pollution, litter, that really is not normal, should not be normal. We should not be accepting of this behavior. So what do we do about that? So what we do is we have to show through various signals the kinds of behaviors that we want to be normal. We need to normalize those behaviors. And normalizing behaviors is a really tricky process, because if the overwhelming behavior out there in the world is to spray your lawn with pesticides, then people see through crude attempts to fool them into thinking that something else is normal. But in fact, there is research showing that people are much more supportive of things like picking up litter, of biking to work and arriving sweaty, of not spreading pesticides on your lawn. People are much more supportive of these behaviors, but because there's no outward demonstration of them, the social norm against them remains, it persists. So what we need to do is discover where the type of behavior is happening that we want to support, and then to make it more visible, make it more socially normative, show that people are doing these things. Lawn signs are a great way because they pop up all over the place, and they kind of cancel out the little pesticide company lawn signs that you sometimes see. I look forward to the day when I see more of this kind of sign than I see the chem lawn signs. So we have to show that the behavior we approve of is actually happening. It is normal. We also, I liked this picture I found of a couple of kids showing that they really care about water quality. So show that caring is normal. The other thing is, and this was the 2014 Conservation Farmer of the Year in Iowa, the Van Dykes. I found their picture online. So as I said earlier in Know Your Audience, different audiences, for example, farmers are going to listen to other farmers, right? And so a great way to make a behavior more acceptable within a specific community is to find the people in that community who are already willing to try that behavior or are trying that behavior themselves, and enlist them as spokespeople, because farmers are more likely to trust other farmers. Hunters and fishers are more likely to trust other hunters and fishers, etc., etc. So find role models, and in particular, the best role models are those people who are really well socially connected in their particular community. Part of making things normative, like the lawn signs, is to give people opportunities to be seen doing whatever behavior it is that you want to spread. So this was an event a few years ago here in St. Paul. It's a frog town, a small community in St. Paul, and they are trying to build a park, and that park will have lots of water conserving amenities like rain gardens and native plantings. And what they did was they invited a lot of people to a party, and then they took pictures, and then they published pictures online, they published pictures in a newsletter, and this helped the entire community see that people I know, people like me, people I see at the grocery store, people I see at the library are excited about this. So the Captain Crook in me says, and maybe this is something I should be excited about too. This is a trend. I should get on board now. And people love to have their picture published. They love to be have pictures taken of them and have their face, their image put out there doing something interesting, something that they believe in. And I love this because people really will go to great lengths to have this opportunity to be seen. So give it to them, and you will help change the social norm. Just gonna check, yep, okay, almost done with this point. So the other piece is just like that funny look makes you feel physiologically anxious. When you get the positive feedback from people about whatever behavior you're doing. So if you walk by somebody's house and they are trimming back some weeds in their rain garden, or they're installing a rain barrel, or whatever the behavior is that you encounter, it's really important to give people the positive feedback of, hey, I noticed you're doing that, and I think it's great. And if we can find ways, public structures, that reinforce that kind of positive feedback. Giving people prizes, giving people just, you know, their name mentioned in the paper for having been a great water steward or having helped with water conservation projects, whatever it might be. People love to be thanked. People love to have their efforts noticed. It's very motivating. It goes right back to that tribal insecurity that we have, each of us inside of us. When somebody around me tells me that I'm doing something good, I feel relieved, like, okay, I'm gonna survive. I'm not gonna get kicked out by my tribe. It's very primal. And then finally, the social norm, it's really important that when you offer people an opportunity to be a part of some sort of water conservation program or take part in some behavior, that you do it in an invitational way, and that people feel that they have the autonomy to say, yes, I will take part, or no. From a social norm standpoint, the best way is to be invitational, because you alone are not going to be able to change the social norm. It takes a few other people inviting this person, or seeing somebody else building a rain garden, or finding out how to properly dispose of their unused medications. All you have to do is be one of a few people who invite somebody to participate in that action. And you are changing that social norm by being just one of a few. It's, I guess there's an old Arlo Guthrie song about, you know, the one person, you see the one person doing it, you think they're kind of a weirdo. The second person, you think, okay, a second weirdo. When you see the third person, then you think, oh, okay, there's a trend here. So know that your invitation is just part of a process of changing the social norm. All right, the third guideline, and I think I'm doing okay for time. So the third guideline from psychology is to make hidden information visible. So I already talked about the evolutionary mismatch hypothesis. Well, making hidden information visible is like taking whatever modern problem we have and turning it into that bear that jumps out of the woods. So a lot of the issues around water today are not visible. They're not visible because they're happening far away, as opposed to right here. It's not the water coming out of my faucet. So they're happening somewhere else. They are not detectable to my human senses. Many of, particularly the contaminants of emerging concern, they are odorless, tasteless. We can drink that water, we can swim in that water and have no idea that there's any problem with that water. So they're happening far away, they're invisible to the senses, and another problem is that many of our current environmental water resource issues are accruing so slowly that we don't necessarily notice the difference over time. We may notice that there's something in the water, but it hasn't changed that much from yesterday. It's not like that bear jumping out in the woods. It's changing so slowly that we habituate to it. So we need to find ways to make these problems like the bear that jumps out of the woods. And there's a qualifier to that, which I would talk about more, and I do talk about more in the workshop that I offer, and I talk about it more in the handbook. And that is, you really have to be careful about balancing the shock effect and the bad information with, on the other hand, some hope and some effective solutions and things that people can engage in to tackle the problem. It's very bad to present people with shocking data for which they cannot do anything. You don't want to arouse a great deal of fear or upset in people without handing them something that they can do about it. So making hidden information invisible with that caveat is very important. You can do that with vivid, concrete images. A great water image. This is from China, and it's samples of water from natural bodies of water, manufacturing pollution that has come out of factories and entered natural bodies of water. This image is a few years old, so, but then I've seen recent evidence that not a lot has changed. You can also make hidden information visible with prompts and reminders. I love seeing these little stencils or big stencils near near the storm sewers here in St. Paul, reminding people that I'm getting a message that my internet connection is unstable, but I'm going to keep going. This prompts people to connect the water, the storm drain, with the nearby river and wildlife. And if you walk by enough of these near every storm drain, you start to make that connection. It starts to become part of your knowledge. So can we make that connection visible with simple things like these storm sewer stencils? Are there other places where we can put a similar kind of reminder? I sometimes see them in public bathrooms. There's been a guerrilla movement to put paper conserving stickers up on the paper towels. We could do the same thing for water. So prompts and reminders. And then feedback is one of my favorite topics. I'll touch on this just quickly because I see that time is flying. The feedback is the idea that every action we get a sense of whether we were effective or not. And it turns out that with cars like the Prius, the improved gas mileage is only, it's the technology of the hybrid is responsible for a great deal of the mileage efficiency benefit. But that changed driver behavior due to feedback also gives a great big bump in efficiency. And can we do the same thing? Can we give people feedback about their water use or about other ways that they interact with water? Can we measure the pollutants in runoff with certain sensors and give big box stores or stores information about how their parking lots are doing, what kind of stormwater runoff, and if they're improving? Can we give them feedback about that? So feedback is a really important motivator for behavior. And in particular, that kind of social feedback, so giving people the thumbs up or the thumbs down for how they're doing is very, very powerful. And this image, there is my signal to tell you about a study that was done just a couple of years ago. It was a recent 2014 study that showed that most Americans would be embarrassed if they thought people knew that they were carrying out bad, polluting behaviors, not good environmental stewardship behaviors. If people knew that they were wasting water, most Americans expressed that they would feel embarrassed. So there really is a sense of importance around these issues. And can we make that importance more visible? Finally, making hidden information visible. Empathy is a really powerful emotion. We want to do something about problems that harm others. And all other recent data show that we are particularly sensitive to things that harm innocent animals. even more than we think about harming innocent humans. We are upset by harm to innocent animals. So this is an image that it hurts me to look at. Here's another one that I found in my preparation for this plenary. A fish wearing a gas mask, no drugs down the drain, showing that this if we don't do the right thing, we really are harming others and innocent others. Of course, as I said before, we need to also create a situation that allows people to act on this concern. So give them structures to properly dispose of their medication. All right, my final point from psychology is that you want to change the context, change the situation, but with a particular eye to helping people feel competent. So my very favorite theory in psychology is called self-determination theory. I don't know if anybody out there has ever read self-determination theory. I love this theory. Self-determination theory posits that we humans have three basic psychological needs, and those needs are for competence or mastery. So we need to feel like I can do this, I'm good at something. We have a need for autonomy, so I need to feel like I can drive my own life. And we have a need for relatedness. I need to feel connected to other people and part of something bigger than myself. And in my work with my colleagues, we have found that sustainable behaviors, asking people to do something different that is more resource conserving, often comes in conflict with these three psychological needs for autonomy, for relatedness, and for competence. And in particular, competence can feel threatened. So what you want to do is you want to offer people opportunities to engage in new behaviors that might feel like they threaten competence. But you want to help them acquire the skills in a way that builds their feeling of competence. And of course, you also, if you're thinking in terms of self-determination theory, you want to make it a choice, make it invitational, as I said before. And you also want to make it something that people will feel like they are going to be joining with others. They'll feel a sense of relatedness. It's part of my Iowa identity to build a rain garden. It's part of my Ames community identity to build a rain garden, whatever it might be. This poster is from Pennsylvania, not Iowa. So creating opportunities for people to acquire new skills helps them build competence. And then also giving people opportunities to practice in a place where the public eye is not on them. Here in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and probably many other places as well, I don't know if you have them there, we have these racks on the front of buses where you can put your bike on, so you can bike someplace, then grab the bus, put your bike on the front of the bus, and ride to your next point, and then get off and ride your bike again. Well, the first time I tried this, I was petrified. And in fact, true to self-determination theory, I put off trying it because I was scared that I wouldn't be able to do it. And it was indeed a terrifying experience with the bus driver glaring at me because I was too slow, and me sitting on the bus the entire time worried that my bike was going to fall off the front and cause an accident on Highway 94. It turns out that at the Minnesota State Fair, they have a bus, at the front of a bus with a bike rack, and people can come up and pick up a bike and try this and build competence, practice this behavior. So if there are behaviors that people express a sense of trepidation around, can you think of ways that you can make those behaviors easier, help them build competence by giving them a safe place to practice? I just have a couple more points. When it comes to context, habits are a huge problem. Habits are our tendency to not think about what we do, but to rely on that Captain Kirk part of our brain to do things without thinking. And it's really hard, as anybody who's set a New Year's resolution knows, to intentionally change unless you also change the context in which the behavior occurs. And it turns out that life offers many points of context change. When people move, when they get a new job, when they finish high school, when they finish college, whatever it might be, the death or the birth of a family member can also be a change of a time of positive or negative change. And at those times of change, people have to renegotiate their habits. And so if you would like people to engage in a new behavior at moving forward in life, what you need to do is provide them with support, with competence building opportunities, with information, with maybe infrastructure and situations that can help them develop new habits that are more supportive of resource conservation. An example could be, what if every house that were sold automatically, when we had the house inspected, the inspectors, I know this is an unrealistic idea, but I'm just throwing it out there, a rain barrel was installed as part of the moving package. So that means that people, when they move into the new house, the rain barrel is there, it's the default option. They get used to that new habit of collecting rainwater when it rains and using that to water their plants. So if we can figure out how to build in conservation options as the default in our behaviors, that would go a long way towards people acting through the situational circumstances in a more resource conserving way. So a couple of bonus tips. Whatever you do, basic psychology, this is from the Onion humor newspaper years ago, psychologists show that people like fun things more than not fun things. So if you can make whatever it is that you're offering something fun, people are more likely to engage in it. And the storm drain goalie game was developed by my friends here at Hamline University from the Center for Global Environmental Education. And at the Minnesota State Fair, kids can play the storm drain goalie game, teaching them the kinds of things that we want to keep out of our storm drains. And it encourages kids to link this game behavior with behavior in the real world of adopting a storm drain and making sure that it is clean. And then they can take a picture of themselves with their adopted storm drain, and it goes online. I also thought this was pretty fun. This one's from Iowa, Practical Farmers of Iowa. Plant cover crops, prevent erosion, prevent runoff, don't farm naked. So make it fun wherever you can. That will invite people into whatever it is that you are promoting. So in conclusion, the messages that I want to leave you with are A, remember the situation. But I also want to leave you with the thought that because of social norms, the most power we actually have is in our individual sphere to create change. So you are changing the social norm. You are opening new opportunities to people psychologically to engage in more water resource conserving behavior. And you may not know the ripple effect you're having, but each behavior change that you make, and when you make it obvious, and each time you go out into the community and help other people make their behavior, their resource conserving behavior more obvious, you are spreading that social norm in the community. And we are like this amoeba of social change. And we just need to move more people towards that transformative edge. And the rest of society will eventually come along, according to the psychological data. So thank you very much. I hope that this has been a useful set of ideas for you. And best of luck.